Peace be upon you. My name is Johannes Trillion. This is Far As I Can Tell, Episode 1, The Lucifer Rebellion. I want to start this out with a quote. You might have heard it before. For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this age, against spiritual hosts of wickedness in the heavenly places. I'll stop it right there. The Lucifer Rebellion. Just to recap, from the intro, the real quarantine, I pretty much put in perspective where we are as a world as it relates to this whole universe, in a sense. Just try to paint a brief picture. We're definitely not alone. This planet is one of trillions, and it belongs to a spiritual government, if you will. And there's a hierarchy in the spiritual government, of course, that ends with the creator of all. That's the source of all this. The creator, controller, infinite upholder. With that being said, with this governance comes delegation. This creator actually delegates authority. I mean, the simple fact that we have life is a delegation of authority because we are indwelt by the same creator. Now, in the real quarantine, I pretty much put in perspective why this planet, it was just touching on why this planet is the way it is. And it's chaotic. If you don't think this planet is crazy, this is not for you. If you think something is wrong, I'm finna tell you how it started. I'm big on like a holistic approach to things. You know, if there's a problem, then you have to get to the root of something. And this planet is a problem. It's plagued with problems. And we finna get to the root of this. Now, with these papers, the Urantia papers, this is what I'm about to talk about because I'm gonna actually go through these papers, this particular paper. And the beauty of this is just a click away. Paper 53, The Lucifer Rebellion. I'm gonna start off with what this is saying. This is the first paragraph. Lucifer was a brilliant primary Lanonandic son of Nebadon. He had experienced service in many systems, had been a high counselor of his group, and was distinguished for wisdom, sagacity, and efficiency. Lucifer was number 37 of his order, and when commissioned by the Melchizedeks, he was designated as one of the 100 most able and brilliant personalities in more than 700,000 of his kind. From such a magnificent beginning, through evil and error, he embraced sin, and now is numbered as one of 3 system sovereigns in Nebadon who have succumbed to the urge of self and surrendered to the sophistry of spurious personal liberty, rejection of universal allegiance, and disregard of fraternal obligations, blindness to cosmic relationships. Yo, I gotta reiterate, this material in itself is dense. Like, it's real heavy. And just being introduced to it is really blinding. Because I'm jumping off in the middle of these papers. But I chose to start here for the simple fact we got like an emergency on our hands as far as this planet is concerned. And basically, there's a few things just to reiterate. Like in the real quarantine, I alluded to the fact that there are several different orders of being, like levels. It's levels out there, bro. And he was in one of them, and he was known as a Lanonandek son. That was his title or order of being. His title was the system sovereign of Satania, which is our local system that our planet resides in, Urantia. So he was the sovereign. Sovereign means ruler. He was the chief executive. Now they mentioned the Melchizedeks. That's another order of being. We'll get to them later. But also Nebadon, which is the local universe that all this takes place in, is run by Michael. Michael is a figure we're going to constantly expound upon, bro, because he run this from a local universe standpoint. Now, the first part of the paper I'm finna skip down, it says, part 1, the leaders of rebellion. Lucifer was not an ascendant being. He was a created son of the local universe. Now, what they mean by an ascendant being, we're ascendant beings if you choose the Father's will. You will ascend beyond this world, on and on and on. Mansion world after mansion world after mansion world. How they kick it. So people, mortal beings such as ourselves, who make the choices, this is what it's really based on, choosing to do the will of the Creator. We're known as ascendant beings throughout the universe. If you were just a mortal creature on a regular old planet and you signed up for the paradise journey, then you're known as an ascendant being. Lucifer wasn't an ascendant being. He was created in a form that doesn't necessarily evolve in that way. Again, there's countless different orders of being out here. And Lucifer, being a Lanonandek son, was not an ascendant being. I'm gonna skip on down. And I skip sometimes, even if you follow along, I'm gonna have to skip sometimes because, again, this material is real dense and I'm sure it's brand new to a lot of people. And I try to stick to initially anyway, I'm trying to stick to the more digestible parts just so we can get the general overview. I will say this is one sentence. Lucifer is now the fallen and deposed sovereign of Satania. Self-contemplation is most disastrous, even to the exalted personalities of the celestial world. And what they're saying is he's no longer in charge of this local system. And the fact that they say self-contemplation, listen, man, this is what it comes down to. Selfishness, self-centeredness, self. That's what we suffering from on this planet. People, beings of all different levels, high and low, rich and poor, who are just out here for self. If you had to reduce the problems of the world down to one simple concept, it's self. Now, how you gonna be self? Like, when there's an infinite creator, how you gonna be about self? Like, it's blasphemous and it's infinite delusion that they're suffering upon, but we finna get into it. Like I said, I'm gonna skip down a little bit. This is still part 1. Very little was heard of Lucifer on Urantia, our planet, owing to the fact that he assigned his first lieutenant, Satan, to advocate his cause on your planet. Satan was a member of the same primary group of Lanonandecs, but had never functioned as a system sovereign. He entered fully into the Lucifer insurrection. The quote-unquote devil is none other than Caligastia, the deposed planetary prince of Urantia and the son of the secondary order of Lanonandecs. At the time, Michael was on Urantia in the flesh. Real quick, now, Jesus incarnated, Michael incarnated in the flesh, we know him as Jesus. At the time Michael was on Urantia in the flesh, Lucifer, Satan, and Caligastia were leagued together to effect the miscarriage of his bestowal mission, but they signally failed. We're going to touch on this bestowal mission. Abaddon was the chief of the staff of Caligastia. He followed his master into rebellion and has ever since acted as chief executive of the Urantia rebels. Beelzebub was the leader of the disloyal midway creatures who allied themselves with the forces of the traitorous Caligastia. So they're giving you a host of characters that participated in this rebellion, on down to some major figures who represented our planet and world in a spiritual sense. And they brought it into the Lucifer Rebellion. Caligastia, he has a right hand that they didn't mention yet, but Dalagastia, this character Abaddon, as well as Beelzebub. And they said leader of the Midway rebels, Midway creatures. Now, I know it's so much, I get it. But these Midway creatures, check it real quick. They are an order of being that's between humans and angels. There's like a midway. And we can't see them with our eyes, but nonetheless, they exist. And we're gonna get into them. We're gonna talk about that. I'm gonna skip down to part 2, the causes of rebellion. Excuse me. Lucifer and his first assistant, Satan, had reigned on Jerusalem for more than 500,000 years when in their hearts they began to array themselves against the universal Father and his then vicegerent son, Michael. Now what they saying, Lucifer and his assistant had reigned on Jerusalem. Jerusalem is known as the capital of Satania. That was his seat of power, so to say. Jerusalem, which again is the capital of Satania. And vicegerent means to rule instead of, like you're standing in for an authority figure. There were no peculiar or special conditions in the system of Satania which suggested or favored rebellion. It is our belief that the idea took origin and form in Lucifer's mind, and that he might have instigated such a rebellion no matter where he might have been stationed. Lucifer first announced his plans to Satan, but it required several months to corrupt the mind of his able and brilliant associate. However, when once converted to the rebel theories, he became a bold and earnest advocate of self-assertion and liberty. No one ever suggested rebellion to Lucifer. The idea of self-assertion in opposition to the will of Michael and to the plans of the universal Father, as they are represented in Michael, had origin in his own mind. So they're really just they're getting into, the early phases of this. And a side note, because he's a figure that's going to come up before, and you may have heard his name before. Michael's chief executive is known as Gabriel. Gabriel, throughout our local universe, will handle business in Michael's stead. Now I'm gonna skip down a little bit, and it's a real heavy paragraph because this is where the rubber meet the road. This is where wickedness looks like. It is very difficult to point out the exact cause or causes which finally culminated in the Lucifer Rebellion. We are certain of only one thing, and that is, whatever these first beginnings were, they had their origin in Lucifer's mind. There must have been a pride of self that nourished itself to the point of self-deception, so that Lucifer, for a time, really persuaded himself that his contemplation of rebellion was actually for the good of the system, if not the universe. By the time his plans had developed to the point of disillusionment, no doubt he had gone too far for his original and mischief-making pride to permit him to stop. At some point in this experience, he became insincere, and evil evolved into deliberate and willful sin. That this happened is proved by the subsequent conduct of this brilliant executive. He was long offered opportunity for repentance, but only some of his subordinates ever accepted the proffered mercy. The faithful of days of Edentia, that's a very high order of being in this local universe, on the request of the constellation fathers, saying, in person presented the plan of Michael for the saving of these flagrant rebels, but always was the mercy of the Creator's Son rejected and rejected with increasing contempt and disdain. They saying he stood down on his lie and took it all the way to the bitter end. And I mean, I'm sure you've encountered people like that. There are people out here who know they're not living in any sort of truth, and they double down on it, they triple down on it, they infinite down on it. Well, not infinite because they don't live forever. And we get to the fate of beings like this, these deliberately sinful creatures, people who know they wrong and stand down on it. And that's what he did. Part 3, the Lucifer Manifesto. Whatever the early origins of trouble in the hearts of Lucifer and Satan, the final outbreak took form as the Lucifer Declaration of Liberty. The cause of the rebels was stated under 3 heads. 1, the reality of the Universal Father. Lucifer charged that the Universal Father did not really exist, that physical gravity and space energy were inherent in the universe, and that the Father was a myth invented by the Paradise Sons to enable them to maintain the rule of the universes in the Father's name. He denied that personality was a gift of the Universal Father. So briefly, he's basically saying, oh no, I mean, space and all this, that was gonna be anyway. There ain't no creator behind this. That's just how this is. And as far as the Paradise Sons, that's Michael. That's what he is. He's an order of being, and they're known as Paradise Sons or Creator Sons. And he's basically saying that somehow or another they just scheming, and all this is a fraud. He's out his mind, like already. I'll skip down a little bit. The charge was sweeping, terrible, and blasphemous. It was this veiled attack upon. Well, I don't need to read that. I'm sorry. Let's skip down to part 2. Again, this is in the Lucifer Manifesto, and this is part 2 of 3 different things this was based on. The universe government of the Creator Son, Michael. Lucifer contended that the local systems should be autonomous. He protested against the right of Michael, the Creator Son, to assume sovereignty of Nebadon in the name of a hypothetical Paradise Father and require all personalities to acknowledge allegiance to this unseen father. Again, a lot of this was bucking on Michael's authority. That's what this was ultimately about. Now, mind you, like the father is so, in a sense, besides your spirit, but from I hate to say it, like a physical locale, paradise is so far away. Michael's pretty much holding down this sector of the universe in the Father's name. And Lucifer is contesting his right to do so, in a sense. Yeah, he asserted that the whole plan of worship was a clever scheme to aggrandize the Paradise Sons. He was willing to acknowledge Michael as his creator father, but not as his God and rightful ruler. Like, that don't even make no sense. Most bitterly did he attack the right of the ancients of days, foreign potentates, he called them, to interfere in the affairs of the local systems and universes. Now, again, we talk about these several different orders of beings. The ancients of days are big dogs in the universe, like for real, for real. And they do a lot on behalf of the Father, and they deal with super universe affairs, and they deal with judgment, and he's trying to buck on them as well. Part 3, these are 3 parts of the Lucifer manifesto that this hinged on, and he attacked the attack upon the universal plan of ascendant mortal training. Lucifer maintained that far too much time and energy were expended upon the scheme of so thoroughly training ascending mortals in the principles of universe administration, principles which he alleged were unethical and unsound. I know this is a little dense again, though. I did mention that we're ascendant beings, and throughout the universe, as you progressively grow and whatnot, he pretty much scoffed at the whole idea of this. Essentially, is what they're saying. He advocated that ascenders should enjoy the liberty of individual self-determination. He challenged and condemned the entire plan of mortal ascension as sponsored by the Paradise Sons of God and the Infinite Spirit. And it was with such a declaration of liberty that Lucifer launched his orgy of darkness and death. Part 4, the outbreak of the rebellion. The Lucifer Manifesto was issued at the annual conclave of Satania on the Sea of Glass in the presence of the assembled host of Jerusalem on the last day of the year about 200,000 years ago. Again, Jerusalem is the capital of Satania, which is the system that our planet belongs in. And they're saying the Lucifer Manifesto was presented. It was like a big gathering, so to say, and they came out with it. Satan proclaimed that worship could be accorded the universal forces, physical, intellectual, and spiritual, but that allegiance could be acknowledged only to the actual and present ruler, Lucifer, the quote-unquote friend of men and angels, and the quote-unquote God of liberty. This is how they presented themselves. And so what Satan basically said on behalf of Lucifer in our system's capital, Jerusalem and Satania, was that Lucifer was now the sovereign, like no allegiance gets past Lucifer. And when they say Satan proclaimed that worship could be accorded the universal forces, you can worship, this creation, the space. You can respect all this energy, the intellectual and spiritual, but worship and any sort of allegiance stops at Lucifer. This is Complete blasphemy. They're lunatics. Celestial lunatics, as we'll see. Self-assertion was the battle cry of the Lucifer Rebellion. I'm gonna skip down. He maintained that all government should be limited to the local planets and their voluntary confederation into the local systems. All other supervision he disallowed. He basically saying like, don't nothing get past this system that I run. Satania. Like, this is the end all be all as far as any being beneath me is concerned. This is heavy, bro. He promised the planetary princes that they should rule the worlds as supreme executives. He denounced the location of legislative activities on the constellation headquarters and the conduct of judicial affairs on the universe capital. He contended that all these functions of government should be concentrated on the system capitals and proceeded to set up his own legislative assembly and organized his own tribunals under the jurisdiction of Satan. And he directed that the princes on the apostate worlds do the same. Apostate is somebody who pretty much abandons God or something good or great for whatever reason. They abandon and do something else. The entire administrative cabinet of Lucifer went over in a body and was sworn in publicly as the officers of the administration of the new head of, quote, the liberated worlds and systems, end quote. While there had been 2 previous rebellions in Nebadon, they were in distant constellations. Lucifer held that these insurrections were unsuccessful because the majority of the intelligences failed to follow their leaders. He contended that majorities rule, their mind is infallible. The freedom allowed him by the universe rulers apparently sustained many of his nefarious contentions. He defied all his superiors, yet they apparently took no note of his doings. He was given a free hand to prosecute his seductive plan without let or hindrance. What they basically saying is he pretty much figured like, look at me, I'm out here doing what I want to do. They ain't stopping me yet. That's because they ain't real. That's how he's running around and kicking it up on high. All the merciful delays of justice Lucifer pointed to as evidence of the inability of the government of the Paradise Sons to stop the rebellion. He would openly defy and arrogantly challenge Michael, Emmanuel, and the Ancients of Days. Now, Emmanuel is in this spiritual government. He's a big brother to Michael in a sense. He's not a creator son like Michael, but he just has a different role and he serves as an advisor. I know, man. It's crazy. This family, this universal family we belong to is deep. He will openly defy and arrogantly challenge Michael, Emmanuel, and the Ancients of Days, and then point to the fact that no action ensued as positive evidence of the impotency of the universe and the super universe governments. Gabriel was personally present throughout all these disloyal proceedings and only announced that he would, in due time, speak for Michael, and that all beings would be left free and unmolested in their choice. Quote, the government of the sons for the Father desired only that loyalty and devotion, which was voluntary, wholehearted, and sophistry proof. End quote. Now, sophistry, that is slick talk that is intending to deceive. It's sophistry. Lucifer was permitted fully to establish and thoroughly to organize his rebel government before Gabriel made any effort to contest the right of succession or to counterwork the rebel propaganda. But the constellation fathers immediately confined the action of these disloyal personalities to the system of Satania. Nevertheless, this period of delay was a time of great trial and testing to the loyal beings of all Satania. All was chaotic for a few years, and there was great confusion on the mansion worlds. Mansion worlds are where we start to progress to if you choose paradise. Part 5. Nature of the conflict. Upon the outbreak of the Satania Rebellion, Michael took counsel of his paradise brother Emmanuel. Following this momentous conference, Michael announced that he would pursue the same policy which had characterized his dealings with similar upheavals in the past, an attitude of non-interference. So Michael was going to fall back and see how this played out. And he already knows how things are going to play out, basically. At the time of this rebellion and the two which preceded it, there was no absolute and personal sovereign authority. Let me get this straight because this is crucial. At the time of this rebellion and the two which preceded it, there was no absolute and personal sovereign authority in the universe of Nebadon. Michael ruled by divine right as vicegerent of the universal Father, but not yet in his own personal right. He had not completed his bestowal career. He had not yet been vested with all power in heaven and on earth. A side note, Michael has to complete seven different missions before he can be granted all power in the universe, in the local universe, and be truly recognized as a sovereign ruler in the Father's name. His seventh and final bestowal was on our planet, Urantia. What he did, the whole local universe knows about. They watching this planet, bro, because some amazing things have taken place with Michael's bestowal on this planet, who we refer to as Jesus Christ. But he's really Michael, and he's known throughout the universe. And on this planet is where he completed his seventh and final bestowal mission, in which he was granted full sovereignty of this local universe. What they're saying, at the time of this rebellion, which took place 200,000 years ago, Michael hadn't been here yet. That was 2,000 years ago. So when this took place, he wasn't the full sovereign ruler like he is now. It's major.